Far Cry 6 has been one of the most anticipated games on my channel ever since the game was announced with that cinematic trailer, which feels like ages ago now. Now this video is going up a bit later than I probably would have liked because, well, Ubisoft, as you all know, despises me and didn't feel the need to give me a review copy of the game, but it's all good. Regardless, I really like to take my time with these new games and do a lot of side content and open world activities to really get the best feel for the game. I'm not the type of person to just speed run the game so I can be the first to have a video on it. But yeah, I was very excited for Far Cry 6. Everything about it sounded great. I will admit, when gameplay first came out, I was a little underwhelmed, but it is Far Cry at the end of the day, so there aren't massive differences from game to game. It also probably doesn't help that I've played pretty much every Far Cry game except the first one in this past year, so I've definitely had my fill of this series and its formula. But surprisingly, despite me being a little tired of this formula, I still had a lot of fun in Far Cry 6. It has a lot of small changes and refinements, specifically with the combat and all the new weapons and customizations that I found to be really fresh. In my opinion, it's definitely not the best Far Cry game I've played, but I can confidently say that it met my expectations and delivered a really solid game. It's sort of a habit of mine to compare games while I'm playing, probably because I've made a whole series around that very idea, and so I was really paying attention to things that were improved or changed from Far Cry 5. Things that people were asking for, and for the most part, I think Ubisoft listened. The only thing that confused me a little was including the health bars again, because a lot of people didn't like that from New Dawn, but it's a very minor thing at the end of the day, and you can always turn it off, so that's not really a big deal. Now, the story is probably what I had the most hope for when it came to this game. Obviously, having a fully voiced protagonist that you can actually see was a big selling point for me, because I really wasn't a fan of the mute protagonist in Far Cry 5 and New Dawn, although some people like it. But Danny is a pretty solid protagonist. I chose the female version despite the fact that I literally said in a video that I wouldn't, but I heard a lot of people saying the female version was better, and I can't really compare since I didn't play with the male version, but what I can say is female Danny has a really solid voice actor. Far Cry has a really bad track when it comes to protagonists, aside from Jason from Far Cry 3. Danny doesn't have a really cool story and character development like Jason did, but at least her motivations and goals are clear. A really big issue when you have a mute protagonist like in Far Cry 5 is that the story rests solely on the villains. Without a main character, the story lacks a certain presence. Danny, for the most part, is a defining presence in the story, and I honestly wish they had done more for her. In the trailers, they were kind of advertising Danny as a vengeful character. The theme was, how far are you willing to go for revenge? What are you willing to do to free your people? And while it's brought up, it really wasn't as big as a theme as I thought it would be. I don't know, I guess I was kind of expecting more character growth and a solid arc from Danny, again like Jason, which we sort of got, but not entirely. But the premise of the game is Danny is trying to escape Yara. Yara is under the rule of the dictator Anton Castillo and is drafting the poor to become test subjects for a cancer-curing drug called Viviro. So Danny wants to sail from Miami and live a normal life. However, as she's trying to leave, her ship is ambushed by Castillo, and everyone on board, including her best friend, are killed, which then leads to her meeting the Yaran resistance, Libertad, and Danny decides to help them out. A very action-packed and engaging intro, and pretty standard for the Far Cry series. Every Far Cry game starts with some sort of intense confrontation with the villain, and Far Cry 6 is really no different. This story actually gave me major Far Cry 4 vibes with the whole resistance versus tyrant thing. I mean, the Golden Path, Libertad, Pagan, King of Kirat, Anton, King of Yara, pretty similar in the idea. There are a lot of cliches in the story with the whole rebellion, fight for freedom, saving the people, etc. We've seen it quite a lot by this point, but it was alright nonetheless. But you're probably wondering what I think about the main man, Anton Castillo. Honestly, I was a little underwhelmed by Castillo. Giancarlo Esposito was great, he has tremendous voice acting and motion capture, he's a really intimidating guy, but overall I found Castillo to be a pretty generic villain, which was really disappointing to me. I was expecting more layers and more dimensions to Castillo. Something I always loved about Far Cry villains is they usually aren't black and white. In fact, a lot of them you could argue are actually the good guys of the story, like the Jackal, Pagan, or Joseph Seed even. And I didn't really get that with Castillo. It was cool how he pretty much had created a miracle cure for cancer in Viviro, but went to extreme and evil lengths to do it. But there was nothing about Castillo that made me feel like he was justified in his actions. If anything, the empathy we may feel for the villains of Far Cry was more for Diego in this story. In fact, the dynamic between Diego and Anton was probably my favorite part involving the Castillos. Diego's a good kid with a very scary father who's trying to to force his vision on his son, and it's really interesting to see how that affects Diego and the dynamic between him and the main character Danny. Now, another problem I found with Anton is how the game follows the annoying Far Cry trend of not giving the main antagonist a lot of screen time. Anton Castillo is not in the game as much as I would have expected or liked, and he interacts with Danny even less so. Danny and Anton hardly interact in this game, and probably part of the reason why I felt Anton to be a little generic is because we didn't get to see enough of him, and what cutscenes he did have were him just showing off how evil he really is. And this honestly goes for the side villains of Far Cry 6 as well. The side villains were really basic and underwhelming, especially when compared to the Seed family from Far Cry 5. There were no consistent themes or standout personalities, they just felt really basic. Some of them had some colorful personalities like Mr. McKay or El Doctor, yes, that's his actual name, but generally the side villains pale in comparison to other side villains from the series. Again, like the Seed family, which each had different goals, beliefs, and crazy personalities. The side characters in Danny's little group are much better though. They each have very unique and fun personalities, they have significant impact on the story and on Danny. Prime examples being Clara Garcia and Juan Cortez. I think the fact that the side characters actually interact and create bonds with the main character also makes them more interesting and gives you reason to actually care about these people. Obviously, a big change as well was the transition from first person to third person cutscenes, which I was pretty skeptical about, to be honest, but I think it turned out quite well. It's nice actually being able to see your character and their expressions, body language, etc. Although something that was always really cool about the first person cutscenes is that it felt like the characters were speaking directly to you through the screen, and you lose that a little with the third person cutscenes, but it is a trade-off. I can't really say definitively which style I prefer, but I think they both have their place, and I enjoyed the third person cutscenes. It was something new, and it definitely increased the presence of the main character, who even when they did have a voice in the old games, kinda used to feel like a shell. But again, some people like that because it makes you, the player, feel like the main character, so I guess it's all just preference based. Although the cutscenes didn't look great in my opinion. I don't know if it was low FPS or different resolution or something, but they looked a little off to me. Maybe that's just me, but the cutscenes definitely didn't feel or look as smooth, which is probably due to the change to third person. I'm obviously not gonna spoil the ending or anything, but honestly, it felt a little underwhelming to me just because I don't think Anton Castillo was properly built up, and I wasn't too invested in him either by the end. But regardless, it is satisfying, and there's a really cool post-credit scene, which if you finish the game, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now, in terms of gameplay, Far Cry 6 is definitely what I would call the wackiest yet of the series, which I think we all expected. It was a pretty big part of their advertising, having an alligator or battle rooster, making a minigun out of a motorcycle engine, or shooting CDs. Personally, I'm someone who usually likes some degree of realism in these games. I mean, the series was never fully realistic, but I did really enjoy the gritty realism from Far Cry 2. But honestly, in Far Cry 6, I was fine with it. There's only so much they can change and do in these Far Cry games now, so having a Supremo that shoots rockets or buffs speed and health was actually a really fun, fresh new tool to use. There's multiple Supremos, each with different abilities and charge up rates and gadget slots. It was easily one of my favorite new additions for this game. My favorite being the Resolver weapons. I really love the weapon selection in this game, and the Resolver weapons are a ton of fun. My personal favorite was the minigun, but there's so many cool, unique weapons that are a ton of fun to use and just make the old Far Cry gameplay feel fresh. Especially for someone like me who's played a lot of Far Cry this year, I really appreciate the new creative weapons and tools, and at the end of the day, fun is still more important to me than realism. You buy these Supremos and Resolver weapons with items you loot in the world and depleted uranium you find at the anti-aircraft sites. It was a really fun system, and you can even make a decent amount of customizations to the weapons too. Something new with Far Cry 6 are ammo types. There's soft rounds, which are more effective against non-armored enemies. Then there's armor-piercing rounds, which are good for armored enemies, and there's standard, incendiary, poison rounds, just a lot more different ways to shoot people. Now, at first, I was a little iffy on this new ammo system because if you don't have the right ammo type, it can take a long time to kill enemies, like using soft rounds on an armored enemy, for example. But it is a good way to force players to be more strategic and pay attention to what type of enemy they are dealing with. However, I easily found a solution to just one headshot kill everyone, and that was just to use armor-piercing rounds on everything. You still one-shot kill non-armored enemies with a headshot, so there's really no reason to even use soft or standard rounds when you can just kill everyone using armor-piercing bullets. And like I said, there's a bunch of other little customizations and mods you can make to your weapons. Definitely the most in-depth weapon customization system for the series yet. You can add mods mods like increased reload time or weapon damage when shooting enemies from below. There's of course suppressors and compensators with multiple variants that affect things like time to overheat, damage range, and sound. The gunplay itself is really satisfying, the weapons feel good, the sound effects are really satisfying like when you get a headshot. However, the time to kill was noticeably longer if you don't get a headshot. Part of that relies on ammo types, but weapons like the bow or sniper don't one-shot kill to the torso, which I found really annoying. I suppose it depends on the type or variant you're using, but a sniper or bow should not take 2 or 3 body shots to kill. I also noticed an inflated time to kill on vehicles as well. Some helicopters and cars would take like 2 or 3 shots from an RPG or grenade launcher to actually destroy, while in past Far Cry's it only ever took 1, so I thought that was a pretty dumb nerf to explosives. There's still C4 and proximity explosives that felt decent, but the RPG and grenade launchers definitely felt weak to me. Luckily, there's some Resolver explosive weapons like this firework launcher I used that was much stronger and could actually consistently blow stuff up. And there's also the ranking system, which I'm not really a fan of either. For some reason, they feel the need to give Far Cry more RPG elements, and it makes some areas of the map really challenging and frustrating to kill enemies in, because if your rank is too low, then the enemies take considerably less damage. They can even take 2 or even sometimes 3 headshots to kill, which is pretty stupid, and I'm not sure why they decided to include a ranking system since everyone despised it in New Dawn. Stealth had a lot of really nice changes in Far Cry 6 though. For one, the machete takedowns are easily my favorite set of takedown animations in the series. They're so brutal and satisfying, it's exactly what the fans were asking for. And there's some new tools like the perception grenade, which made stealth so much easier. It's this grenade that sends out a pulse and automatically scans and marks all enemies in the vicinity. I use that thing probably more than any other tool in the game, and it made maneuvering and taking out enemies in stealth a lot easier. The lure system is also different. You used to be able to just throw an infinite amount of rocks or cans to lure enemies. While in Far Cry 6, you have to equip baseballs into one of your Supremo slots and throw them to lure enemies. Kind of an odd change, not really sure what was wrong with the old system, but it wasn't a big deal. I hardly found myself even needing to use lures in the first place anyway. By far the best stealth weapon for me was just using a suppressed marksman rifle. It was really easy to just one-shot enemies with an ACOG and armor-piercing rounds. It made clearing military outposts really quick and easy. In fact, for the first time in a Far Cry game ever, I think I was able to clear all of the outposts completely undetected. Not to mention, paired with the perception grenade, it made stealth very fun and easy. A lot of outposts also have cameras now that can spot and alert enemies to your position, but those were super easy to deal with, but still a cool new little addition for stealth. In fact, there's a lot of really nice little changes like that, like the hijack animations. You can actually hijack a vehicle while you're driving in one, which just looks so clean. You can even slide down hills and slopes now, which again is just another fun little change. You can also easily call your vehicle with a press of a button and someone will bring it to you now, which was a really nice new change because you used to have to go to a designated station if you wanted to call in your vehicle. The inventory system is also completely different. It's more RPG styled now. There's different gears and ranks for each gear set that can give you specific skills or boosts. For example, the boots I was wearing allowed me to do a grenade takedown, which used to be something you had to unlock in the skill tree, which actually brings me to my next point, and that there is no skill tree in Far Cry 6. Far Cry has had that traditional skill tree going all the way back to Far Cry 3. And instead of the skill tree in 6, you already start out with a lot of the skills, and then some of the more advanced or complex ones you unlock through specific gear or settlement buildings. Like the wingsuit, for example, is something you actually have to unlock by building the hideout network. To be honest, I think it was pretty clever of them because there aren't really any new skills, and unlocking the same skills again for the 4th game in a row would have been really tedious. So I like how you just start the game with pretty much all of them, with a few exceptions of course, so it doesn't feel like you're starting from square one again. The amigo system is basically like the guns for hire system from the previous games, except it's only animals. Each amigo has a specific skill set or category they fall under, like some being combat focused and others being stealth focused. I didn't really find myself using amigos all that much, but they are helpful and nice to have. The settlement system is back in Far Cry 6, although it feels a little simplified when compared to New Dawn's version, but basically you get multiple camps in different regions of the map where the game brings you into third person, and you can build and upgrade parts of the camp and even play some mini games like Chicken Mortal Kombat. Like I said, it's not the most in-depth home base system, but I still enjoyed it. Yara is a very stunning open world and fun location for the Far Cry series. I think it's way more fitting for a Far Cry game, the tropical exotic location. I know a lot of people really liked Hope County from Far Cry 5, but Yara definitely felt more appropriate for a Far Cry game to me personally. It's a fictional island in the Caribbean, mainly inspired by Cuba and Haiti, and it was a really cool setting. It's very immersive, I love the vibrant colors and the environmental variety. This is the first time in a Far Cry game we ever get a large, dense city in the open world, which is really cool, and generally Yara is a great open world. Now, it's still not my favorite of the series. I think that will forever remain Kirat from Far Cry 4, but Yara is certainly a contender. It was a great world to just go around and explore in. It's split into multiple regions like Far Cry 5, each with a different villain or faction overseeing said region. And again, one of the downsides to the world is that a lot of areas may be too high of a rank, which can be really frustrating in the early game when you're still a low level. The world does also have a lot of fun activities. Outposts still remain one of my favorite things to do in this game. The checkpoints and anti-air sites were also a lot of fun to clear out and loot. You get some pretty good rewards from them as well. There's also supply drops or ambushes in the world you can complete. There's always just a long checklist of things you can do to keep yourself distracted and still playing even when you're finished with the main story. The main story itself took me about 23 hours to finish, and then there's obviously dozens of hours worth of exploring and side quests and activities to do as well, not to mention the mini games and co-op feature. You certainly won't run out of things to do anytime soon. However, Far Cry 6 doesn't have the arcade, which was one of my favorite features of Far Cry 5, but there's still plenty to do. In terms of graphics, the game obviously looks great, as I'm sure you can tell by just watching the video, and performance was also really good on PC as well. On high settings and 1440p, I was easily averaging a solid 90 to 100 FPS, with a few drops here and there when there's a lot of flames and explosives on screen. The game also has great colors and vibrance, like I mentioned earlier. Really, my only issue was I thought the anti-aliasing was a bit blurry. TAA looked too blurry to me, and SMAA looked too jagged, and those are the only two anti-aliasing options, but I eventually just decided to suck it up and get used to the TAA, and eventually I didn't even notice the blurriness anymore. Far Cry 6, while by no means a perfect game, was still overall really fun. I liked a large majority of the changes and new additions they made to the gameplay, like the new Supremo and Resolver weapons and customizations. Stealth was extremely satisfying with the new takedowns. Yara is an excellent open world, and the story was pretty solid. There were some issues with it for me, and I expected Anton Castillo to be a little more present and fleshed out than he actually was, but it wasn't a terrible story by any means. So should you buy Far Cry 6? I say yes. The game actually met my expectations, and while it doesn't completely rewrite or evolve the Far Cry formula, there's still a lot of fun to be had and little additions that were really refreshing. I'd personally recommend you just wait for a sale because, well, why not? It's not like the game is going anywhere, and chances are there may be more updates and content by then. I'm very excited for the season pass for this game. Getting to play as Voss, Pagan, and Joseph is going to be awesome, and I can't wait to see what they do with that. I also plan on making a which game is better video for Far Cry 6 versus Far Cry 5, so let me know if you want to see that down in the comments. And also, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I've made a lot of Far Cry videos on my channel and plan to do even more in the future. I've left links in the description to my reviews of Far Cry 5, New Dawn, 4, Primal, 3, and Far Cry 2, so check those out if you'd like. And other than that, thanks for watching and have a great day, everyone.